Welcome to the scaring YouTube channel of Brave Souls, to a tale of terror unlike any other, a story of a seemingly innocent creature, a cat named Midnight, who holds a secret darker than the night itself. Tonight, as you sit in the comfort of your home, beware the shadows that creep along the walls, for not all cats are as they seem. Prepare yourself for the Haunting of Midnight Whiskers. Let's get into the story. In a quiet town nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, there stood an ancient house. The house was known for its creaks and groans, but it was also known for one thing in particular: its cat. Midnight was a sleek, black feline with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, glowing with an unnatural amber hue. Some said that Midnight had been there long before the previous owner had passed away, and others whispered that the cat had never aged a day. The new owners, a young couple named Sarah and Tom, weren't superstitious folk. They had laughed off the stories from the locals about the mysterious Midnight. To them, the cat was just a pet, left behind by the elderly woman who had lived in the house for decades. They decided to keep him, believing the presence of the animal would add some life to the otherwise desolate home. But it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. On their first night in the house, as the clock struck midnight, Sarah woke to a soft, rhythmic thumping noise. She sat up in bed, her heart racing as she strained to listen. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was the soft padding of paws across the wooden floor. She nudged Tom awake, and together they followed the noise down the long, narrow hallway. There, at the end of the corridor, was Midnight, sitting perfectly still, staring at them with those glowing eyes. His tail flicked lazily back and forth, but his gaze never wavered. The couple shrugged it off as the cat exploring its new home, though something about the way he stared at them left Sarah unsettled. The next day, Sarah noticed something odd. Wherever Midnight sat, a small patch of frost seemed to form beneath him. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but every time she passed the spot, the air felt colder, as though the temperature dropped by several degrees. The cat, however, seemed unfazed, continuing his usual routine of wandering the house in silence. That night, the noises grew louder. It wasn't just the soft padding of paws anymore. Now there were faint whispers, almost like murmurs just out of earshot, coming from the darkened corners of the house. Tom thought it was the wind, brushing it off with a dismissive wave. But Sarah couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. Midnight was always nearby, watching, never blinking, his amber eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. As the days passed, Sarah began to have vivid nightmares. In her dreams, Midnight would sit at the foot of her bed, watching her with those piercing eyes, his mouth slightly open as though he were about to speak. But when he did, the words were nothing but garbled whispers, like something ancient trying to communicate through him. The dreams always ended the same way, with Sarah waking up drenched in sweat, her heart racing, and Midnight sitting at the end of her bed, just as he had in her nightmare. One evening, after yet another restless night, Sarah decided to do some research. She dug through old records and discovered something that chilled her to the bone. The previous owner of the house, the old woman, had not been the first. There had been many before her, all of whom had mysteriously vanished, and each one had reported seeing the same black cat before they disappeared, a cat with glowing amber eyes. Sarah confronted Tom, insisting that they get rid of Midnight, but Tom refused. "It's just a cat," he said. "You're being paranoid." That night, Tom disappeared. Sarah woke to the same thumping noise, only this time, Tom wasn't beside her. Panicked, she searched the entire house, calling out his name, but he was nowhere to be found. Her heart raced as she followed the sound of soft footsteps to the basement door, which was slightly ajar. She hesitated, feeling the icy air seeping out from the dark stairwell below. Gripping a flashlight, Sarah descended into the basement. The cold was unbearable, and the air felt thick with something unseen, something evil. As the light flickered, she saw it, Midnight, sitting in the center of the basement, staring at her with those glowing eyes. But there was something else. The floor around him was covered in frost, and behind him, The outline of a figure was barely visible, trapped in the icy wall. It was Tom. Before she could react, the temperature in the room plummeted. Midnight's eyes gleamed brighter, and the whispers grew louder. Sarah felt her body freeze, not from the cold, but from fear. She tried to move, but her limbs were stiff, her breath forming small clouds in the air. Midnight slowly walked toward her, his eyes locked onto hers. "You can't leave." The voice came not from the cat's mouth, but from the very walls themselves, echoing in her mind. And then everything went dark. Sarah was never seen again. The house, they say, still stands, and Midnight remains, waiting for his next unsuspecting victim. Some say if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers of those who have disappeared, trapped in the icy grip of the cat that haunts the shadows. So, if you ever find yourself in a house with a cat whose eyes glow just a little too brightly, beware, for Midnight may be watching you next. And that, dear listeners, was the tale of the Haunting of Midnight Whiskers. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all things spooky. Until next time, sleep with one eye open, for you never know what might be lurking in the dark.